Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. I am Harry, and before we go any further, don't forget to hit the like button down below and subscribe to our channel if you're interested in some more board game related content. But today we have another top 10 list for you. Today we'll be doing the top 10 games from 1996 to 2000. So last week I covered my top 10 games from 1991 to 1995. And I explained how I have an appreciation as a historian of sorts for these older games. And I feel like these games are very often neglected, overlooked, and just not getting the attention that they merit due to the fact that there's this craze within the hobby for the next big thing, the next upcoming game, right? Sometimes even the game that came out 3 months ago feels old. And these games are rich games, and I feel like these games from this time period are kind of like the games that laid the foundation for the current golden era of board gaming, where nowadays these modern, newer, contemporary designers are basically standing on the shoulders of the greats, right? Shoulders of great, people from the past who have worked hard to build that momentum and establish that foundation in the board gaming hobby. These are 10 classic games. I had a really hard time with this list because I counted and my short list was like 33, 34 games. So I've actually played a lot more games from 1996 to 2000 than I did from 1991 to 1995. But I had a lot of fun making this list. I had to make some really, really tough decisions and basically say, these are the games that I like the most, and I had to leave behind some board games that are very, very popular and well regarded and well liked by lots of people in the board game community. And I like them too, but they just quite didn't make the cut. So I had to make that tough decision. And some lesser known games did make the cut, which I'm actually excited about talking about those lesser known games. So without any further ado, we're going to go into my top 10, but actually a little bit more ado. I do want to make one honorable mention. My number 11 just missed the list. I seriously considered it, and I think for many people it would definitely be in their top 10, if not their top 5 games from this period of time. But it only made it to number 11 for me, and that's this one right here by Uwe Rosenberg, Bonanza. I like Bonanza. It's a fun game. It's a classic. It was Uwe's first venture into the board game design career that he began, and one of his earlier, more popular games. And again, he has this craze for agricultural themes, farming type of themes, planting themes. Here you're planting beans, right? It's a simple card game with a nice trade mechanism and a unique card holding mechanism where you cannot change or rearrange the order in which you draw your cards. So this, again, for many people would be their number 1, but it didn't quite make it to my top 10. And now we move on to the top 10 proper with the number 10 game from this time period for me, and that is Rheinlander, designed by Rainer Knizia and published by Face to Face Games. This game, first of all, is out of print. That I'm aware of, there's no real way of acquiring this game. But I was able to get a used copy at a pretty decent price, and I'm sure there's other, I haven't checked recently, but I'm sure there's other ways of getting used copies, either through eBay or the geek market on BoardGameGeek.com. So this is an area control game by Rainer Knizia, and it's interesting, this came out in 1999, shortly after El Grande, which had, pretty much introduced the area control genre to the board gaming world and was a massive hit, a Spiel des Jahres winner. And Rainer Knizia wanted to get in on the action for area control games, right? And I think he's done a few games that have this area control, area majority. As a matter of fact, there's a few others that make it to my list of this very same top 10. So first of all, let me show you the board. This is not great production quality by any means. This is I do not like the graphic design of this board. The components are pretty chintzy. You have knights, which are represented by little discs. So basically, your establishing majority in different areas by placing your knights, and your knights look like this. This is what your knights look like. They're little disc on your, right there. You know, really basic disc, not even a cube. I probably would have preferred a cube myself. And then you do have these pieces which are a little bit nicer, which are the dukes. Dukes right here, which represent an entire area that you control. You know, a contiguous line of, you know, spots that you've controlled through your knights. You put a duke there to represent that that's one of your duchies. So the pieces are not great. This is where the cards look like. But I like the mechanism of the game because basically you have a bunch of spaces numbered from 1 through 54, I think. And it's signified by the different cards here that are also numbered from 1 through 54. And each of those numbers has like 3 different spots. It has 2 regular regions plus a water region in the middle. And when you play a card, you get to place one of your knights on that spot. But if you place a card that already, you know, you could place a card to put it down, or you could choose to place a card to just throw away a card. Let's say you want to play down your number 34, but you're not really interested in area number 34. You could just throw away number 34 and use it to place a knight adjacent to a region in which you already have another knight. And by building consecutive spots of 2 or more knights, 2 or more spaces where your knights are occupying, basically that constitutes as a duchy. And you place a duke there to represent that you have control of that duchy. And throughout the game, you're going to be having situations where different duchies will merge based on a player placing a knight or a card that allows them to place a knight on a spot that basically connects 2 existing duchies. And what happens is you compare for majority now. So now that those 2 duchies become one, and you're going to compare who has the most knights within that new duchy. And what's going to happen is the player who wins, who has the majority, is going to control that new duchy. But the player who just lost control of that duchy, who was overtaken, is going to be able to score a certain amount of victory points for the amount of knights they have, for some of the special buildings that they might touch. You have different buildings like churches and castles and cities, and all these different buildings score you certain points accordingly. So sometimes being overtaken is not necessarily a bad thing because you score points, right? But you still want to build the biggest duchies as possible. You still want to build some momentum with your duchies because obviously the bigger the duchy is, the more points you're going to score when it does get overtaken. And also, finally, at the end of the game, you do score a certain amount of points for your remaining duchies, right? And so on and so forth. I find it to be a very neat game, very, very interesting. I like area control, area majority. I must give that disclaimer. I have a very special place. I feel like an area control, area majority game can almost never fail to be liked by me. I mean, obviously, I like them in varying degrees, but I do appreciate them for the most part. If you are a fan of Reiner Knizia games, if you like area majority, if you're interested in classic games that are out of print, hard to find obscure games, this might be a game you want to check out. My number 10 game from 1996 to 2000, and that is Rheinlander. And now I move on to my number 9 game of all time, or from this period, 96 to 2000. And that is a more known game, Tigris and Euphrates, also designed by Reiner Knizia. And this edition here is published by Fantasy Flight Games. This is a game very well renowned. It's his highest ranked game on BoardGameGeek.com. Lots of people know it. Lots of people like it. Lots of people hate it. It's a very polarizing game. And this game here, basically, again, there's a little bit of area control, area majority. You're placing tiles down on a board, which is made up of a grid of several square spaces. And you're either placing tiles that represent different spheres of civilization, or you're placing down a leader, which you have these nice little pieces which represent 4 different types of leaders. You have your kings, you have your farmers, you have your merchants, and you have your priests. And they're not necessarily color coded, they're shape coded. So what happens is every player has their unique shapes of these pieces that represent them. So you could have, you know, a bow and arrow. All your pieces are in the shape of a bow and arrow. All your pieces are in the shape of a lion, and so on and so forth. And what happens is you're placing these pieces down, but the pieces are colored to represent which leader and which sphere of civilization they're representing, right? So you have your black as your kings, and your red are your priests, and your blue are your farmers, and your green are your merchants, and the corresponding tiles have the same colors that match with them. And what you're doing is every time you place a tile down on the board, you score points for that tile if you have leaders in that region that match that tile's color. And what you're doing is, over the course of the game, you're going to be racking up points like that, and whoever has the highest score wins the game. Typical Euro-style game. However, what's interesting is your final score is going to be based, because you're scoring points for all these four different colors. Your final score is going to be the color in which you score the least. So for those who have played Ingenious has borrowed that mechanism. Another Rheinlander Knizia design has borrowed that mechanism from Tigers and Euphrates, the originator of that mechanism, which I find neat because it forces you to be balanced. It forces you to try to, you know, do okay, at least all right, in all four different categories instead of going strong, heavy in one area. Now, lots of people probably won't like that because they feel like they're being pigeonholed into a particular strategy. They feel like they don't get to necessarily make their own decisions. The game kind of plays them. I disagree because, again, you know, you kind of have to go with the flow. You're not always going to be able to, you know, do as okay with some categories as others. There's going to be a little bit of deviation, and there's going to be areas where you're going to score more points in. However, that doesn't mean that you absolutely, totally want to forget about a more neglected area. You still want to get some points in that area because you want to keep up with your opponents. Now, the thing about this game is that it can be mean. There is a lot of conflict. This is where the whole internal versus external conflict, the terminology I think used in the more modern editions are revolt or war. Revolts are battles that happen within a region where leaders are fighting to have influence in that region, right? And then wars are when you connect two already established regions, and basically, if there are leaders that match from one region to another, there can only be one at the end of this war. So if I have a black piece and you have a black piece, and now we've made these two kingdoms into one, we're going to compare influence. Whoever has more black tiles supporting their king will end up winning the battle. And you can always add some tiles from your hand. You have a hand of tiles that you're placing. You can always add some tiles from your hand, and that could add to your supporters if you think you have a chance of winning the game. And then you score points equal to the amount of damage, basically, that you deal on your opponent. So basically, the only way to score points exponentially in this game is to be aggressive, to be in your face, to be confrontational. If you're going to be passive about this game, you're not going to win. This is not for people with thin skin. You definitely have to be thick-skinned. You definitely have to be able to embrace the fact that people are going to attack you. There is no other way. And you also have to be willing to do some attacking because, again, there is no other way. If you don't like those kind of elements in your Euro abstract style games, then you're not going to like Tigers and Euphrates. Again, I don't necessarily love this game. That's why it's only my number 9, but I do like it. And every so often, I'm in the mood for a game like Tigers and Euphrates. My number 9. Now, my number 8 game from this time period is Ra. Also, again, designed by Rheinlander Knizia. Rheinlander Knizia was on fire during this 5-year period. I swear, so many of his games, even lots of the games on my short list that didn't make it to my top 10, were designed by him. Now, Ra, this edition here, published by Wind Rider Games, this is a modern reprint. Ra is an Egyptian-themed game where you are bidding for different tiles, and you're trying to collect sets of these tiles, right? And some of these tiles here, they have a scarab, which mean that they will remain on your tableau from round to round. This game takes place over 3 rounds. They're going to remain on your tableau from round to round and score you points, either from round to round or like the monuments here. They only score you points at the end of the game. But the point is you get to build upon these sets. You get to keep them. They remain permanent. They remain safe within your possession. And you have no chance of losing them. However, you also have some tiles like this civilization tiles here that they do not have a scarab on them, which signifies the fact that they're not permanent. They're transient. They're temporary in nature. And what happens is that at the end of each round, you do score for these accordingly to whatever amount you were able to accumulate. However, you have to discard them at the end of the round, and that kind of sucks, right? So you're balancing these two different types of sets of tiles that you're collecting, the permanent ones and the more temporary ones that you're not going to be able to keep. What's interesting is you're bidding for these, and the way you bid is you don't bid with your typical currency. Instead, you bid with these sun discs. And the game comes with sun discs ranging from 1 through 16, and depending on the amount of players, each player gets a certain prearranged set of sun discs. So, for example, one player might have the 2, the 5, the 6, and the 9. Another player might have the 3, the 4, the 8, and the 7, right? And this is what you got to deal with, at least to start the game. And when you're bidding, what you're doing is you have a one-time bid, and you're bidding one of these discs. And the player who bids the highest number wins the auction, typically. And what happens is there's one of these sun discs is already on the center of the board, right? Along with all these other tiles that you're bidding for. So not only do you acquire all the tiles that you won for winning that auction, but what you do is you exchange your sun disc that you just won the auction with for the sun disc that's on the board. So sometimes you might be getting a great set of tiles, but you're getting a poor number on the sun disc, which first of all can hurt your chances of winning auctions in future rounds. And also the sun discs themselves are worth victory points at the end of the game. So it's interesting just managing that balance of knowing when's the right time to win, when's the right time to overbid. Also, the fact that there is no currency, instead there's just these sun discs that are visible to you, actually makes you be able to plan out and plot out your auctioning strategy pretty well, because there are times where you'll clearly know that you're going to win the bid because you can look around and you know what your opponent's sun discs are, and you know that you have the highest sun disc available and that there's nothing they could do if you really, really want to win the bid. However, the tension, one of the other tensions that comes with this game is that you allow the auction track to pile up, right? Because you want to have as much valuable stuff as possible before initiating an auction. But then these raw tiles are drawn out and they force an auction. And even worse yet, after a certain amount of raw tiles are drawn, it automatically triggers the end of the round, and you don't even get to bid for what's on the auction track once the round is over. And you're frustrated because you pressed your luck trying to see how many great tiles you can accumulate and bid for them, and then you don't even get them. Again, this is a great game, brilliant game, simple game, quick game. If you like the Egyptian theme, if you like set collection, if you like auction bidding, I do not see why you would not enjoy this game. My number 8 game from this time period, Ra. Now we move on to my number 7, Lord of the Rings, again designed by Reiner Knizia. This edition here published by Fantasy Flight Games. This is the original cooperative game. I love Lord of the Rings. I like cooperative games. Now, this game is interesting because most Lord of the Ring themed games that are in the market right now are either mass market, mechanically, devoid games, or they're Ameritrash games with lots of conflict, lots of luck-based dice rolling and things like that, right? Rich in story, a lot of the usual characteristics that you expect in Ameritrash games. But this is a Euro-style Lord of the Rings game, which there are not too many out there in the market. So I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, again, like as I mentioned, and I'm a big cooperative fan. And I love the fact that this game now, again, this is an older game. This is published in 2000. The components, originally published in 2000, the components are not that impressive. Basically, you're going through 4 quests, which are represented by these 2 double-sided boards. So they show you the 4 quests. And this game is very abstracted, as most Reiner Knizia games tend to be. You're trying to play cards and tiles that allow you to advance through these tracks, which signify your progress through these quests and ultimately to your final goal of getting to Mordor and destroying the One Ring at Mount Doom. Very, very cool. Each player controls their own Hobbit character. You got Frodo, you got Samwise, you got Merry and Pippin, and you each have a special ability according to who you are, which actually feel very, very thematic. And you're taking turns being the ring bearer, carrying the burden of carrying the ring. And you want to survive because you're going through this corruption track. You know, you're going to be gaining corruption throughout the game. It's inevitable. And every time you gain corruption, you advance on this track. And there's ways to heal and regress and go back on this track. But ultimately, your progress is going to lead you forward. And Sauron starts back here, and he starts advancing. And no matter what you do, Sauron never stops. He never goes back. And if Sauron ever overlaps with one of the Hobbit characters, then that Hobbit is killed. He dies immediately. And if that Hobbit was the ring bearer, then all of the players lost, which is terrible. Now, again, this game is very abstracted, but I do feel like some of the storyline comes out through the use of these different events, which represent different things that happen in the movies, or I should say the books, because this actually came out in 2000, shortly before the trilogy came out in theaters. And I think it's more based on the trilogy of books. But it's really, really cool because you recognize some of these things that happen in the books or in the movies, and it gives it a little bit of flavor. You're acquiring runes that eventually let you call upon Gandalf, because Gandalf could help you in some amazing ways. He's not really a permanent fixture, but when he's there, he's so helpful, kind of like in the story. Again, this is really, really cool. Lots of great teamwork, lots of puzzly feel. I find it to be a very challenging cooperative game, and I could see how this laid the foundation for lots of the common elements in future cooperative war games. My number 7 game from this time period, Lord of the Rings. Now we move on to my number 6, and that is Merchants of Amsterdam, again designed by Reiner Knizia. And you could hear that right there. I just triggered this without even trying. We have this little auction timer here. You click it. This is another auction bidding game. Let me see. Auction bidding game. Right? Where the mechanism is neat because this is how you bid for whatever you're bidding for. You hit this, and the player who hits this, whatever number it's on, that's how much money they're going to pay for what they bid for. Now, this game, again, it's not going to rock your world for the components. Terrible components. I wish I could find a way to upgrade this because I really like this game. This is what the board looks like. Pretty bad, cartoony graphic design. Not really good at all. And basically what you're doing is, on each turn, a player on his turn is going to draw 3 of these cards. And these cards either let you advance in one of the 3 different spheres. You're basically merchants trying to advance your commerce in one of 3 different spheres, either through shipping, ships, or through trade offices that you're establishing throughout the 4 regions of the earth, the 4 corners of the earth, or by building warehouses in Amsterdam. And these cards allow you access or a presence in each of those 3 different spheres. And again, this is an area majority game where you're trying to have the majority in those different spheres, because whoever has the majority or even the secondary in those areas is going to score a certain amount of money, which are your points at the end of the game. And if you have if your region is more valuable than another region, then you score even more points, and so on and so forth. So now, on your turn, you're drawing 3 cards, but you're drawing them one at a time. And each time you draw the card, you have to make the decision to either keep that card all for yourself without it being contested, or put it up for auction where all players, including yourself, can bid for it, for the right to that card. And finally, another card has to be discarded. But you're making that decision one at a time. So, hindsight is 20/20. You wish you could know what's going to happen. So you might be putting a card on this card, hoping to get a better card, and then you find out that card was the best card available, and you're frustrated because you discarded it. Games like Herbaceous copied that mechanism where you are, adding cards to a common pool, basically the ones that are being auctioned. You're taking cards all for yourself to your own private pool, or you're discarding cards and getting rid of them. And again, you're making those decisions one at a time. I find it to be so simple, but at the same time, a very neat mechanism that adds lots of tension to the game. A fun auction bidding system, which is unique and different from other auction games that we're playing. And again, an area majority, area control element to the game, which for me, area majority can, like I said, hardly ever fails to hit it on the nail with me. If you like, again, classic style games, Reiner Knizia games, out of print, obscure, hard to find games that nobody talks about, this is a game you want to try, Merchants of Amsterdam. Now we move on to my number 5 game from this time period. And as you've already guessed, it's from Reiner Knizia. This is Hollywood Golden Age, and this is a reprint of an older game from 2000, originally published in 2000, otherwise known as Dream Factory or Hollywood Blockbuster or Trunk Fabric. This is a game where players are taking the role of Hollywood producers, and you're going through Hollywood, and you're going through different buildings, the different studios, the different clubs, and you're trying to bid for the rights to different directors, different actors and actresses, different special guests or cameo actors, different cameramen, different seamstresses, and all these different elements that comprise a Hollywood production. And you have all these different films. You have these tiles that represent the different films. And this one here, got Hollywood Golden Age, is based on the Golden Age of Hollywood back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And you have all these actors that you've heard of, but you've probably never seen their films before. And you're trying to acquire them, and you're bidding for them. And you're trying to fill these tiles that each have different requirements. And each have a different potential as to how many points they could score you. And you're trying to get the best films in 3 different types of genres. And they have thematic names to them, but that's not really that important. They're color-coded. Red, blue, and green films. You're trying to have the best films in each of those. You're trying to have the best film overall from round to round to score extra points. You're even trying to have the worst film so that you could get the B-movie award, and all of these score you points throughout the game. Now, what's interesting about this game, another auction bidding game where the auctioning is unique, because what happens is when a player wins their auction, they distribute the money that they bid for that group of tiles, actors and directors that they're going to put on their scripts. They pay that money and distribute it among the losers of the auction. So sometimes losing an auction that you really wanted to win can be beneficial, because it sets you up with the money to win a future auction, right? So that is so cool. So you have a limited pool of funds that remains in the game according to the amount of players that are playing. There is no access to more money outside, right? The economy is not going to grow. It stays limited. So you could even kind of calculate and map out, especially in smaller player accounts, how much money each player has, and really give yourself a good chance of winning an auction. And again, set yourself up to try to be in a position in future rounds to win an auction successfully. Neat game, neat theme, unique auction bidding mechanism, beautiful production, I would say, from Ludanova Games. This is a Spanish company. I'm not sure. I don't think this is being distributed or published in North America. Now we move on to my number 4 game from this time period. And finally, for the first time in this list, we're going to get to a game that's not designed by Reiner Knizia. And that is Tikal, which is designed by the duo of Michael Kiesling and Wolfgang Kramer. These two have produced lots of games. This was originally published by Rio Grande Games. This came out in 1999 and was a Spiel des Jahres winner, by the way. This is, again, area control, area majority, which I adore. I think there's a good couple of games from this time period that fit within that category. And Wolfgang Kramer does area majority well. He's really good at it. He's mastered this. And here he's teaming up with Michael Kiesling. Now, what's interesting about this game is you're a group of explorers going through the Mayan jungles. You're basically cutting down through trees, which is represented by the placement of tiles. So this is a game where the map kind of unfolds as you place these different tiles. And on these tiles, here's a volcano. This signifies actually a scoring round. On these tiles, you find different things. Sometimes you just find empty spaces where you can establish camps, which helps you more efficiently navigate through the rest of the jungle. Sometimes you have treasures. You have tiles where you'll find treasures on these. And this is basically a set collection. You're collecting sets of different types of treasures. And the larger the sets you have, the more points you will score. You also get these temples, right? And each temple has a startup value. This one, for example, costs 4. And throughout the game, you're trying to excavate these temples, which you place a tile of a higher value number. So for example, if I excavate this 4 right here, I would put a 5 tile on top of it. And it would indicate that that temple is more valuable for me. So every scoring round, if I have majority in those temples, I will score that many points. Now, what's neat and cool about this game, besides the area majority that's going on, is the action point system that was developed by Kramer and Kiesling. And basically, each turn, a player has 10 action points. And they have about 6 different things that they can do with those action points. But every different action costs a different amount of action points. So basically, it's like you're budgeting your turn because you're determining how many actions you could do that could total to 10, and how can you do it most efficiently? Because you may not want to do one action if you realize that it's going to leave you over with, not the right amount of actions. You're not going to get the most. You're not going to milk your turn for what it's worth. You might want to skip out on an action, save it for a future turn, because on this current turn, if you combine your actions correctly, you can get the most out of those 10 possible actions. So you can move. For example, movement is simple. It's just one action, but certain things take up more actions, like excavating a temple and finally establishing a camp or setting a security guard or a guard on top of one of the temples that you already control. Those obviously cost even more actions than just a simple movement. And you're combining all these things, and again, every time a volcano tile is drawn, that triggers a scoring round, and whoever has the most points at the end of the game wins the game. This game is really, really neat. I like the exploration feel. I like the theme. I like the look of it. And I like the area majority. And my number 3 game from this time period is Taj Mahal. Once again, we're back to Dr. Rainer Knizia. This, I swear, is my last game from this time period designed by Rainer Knizia. My number 3, Taj Mahal. I love this game. This game is hardly ever talked about. This is a reprint from Z-Man Games, and it is much prettier than the older editions from what I've seen on images at BoardGameGeek.com. Nice little board here representing India. And you have the different regions of India. And basically you have 12 regions of India, and your players are going throughout these 12 different regions trying to vie for influence over the different court members and try to gain control of the marketplaces in each of these regions. Finally culminating in region number 12, which is always going to be in Agra. And what you're doing is you're having this neat auction system where instead of spending money, what you're doing is you're playing these cards one card at a time, and they're color coded, right? You have blue, and you have yellow, and you have pink, and you have green. And you also have white cards, which are basically wild cards that could be played along with the other cards of the different colors. And what happens is once you commit on a turn or on a bid to your blue color, all the cards that you play for the rest of that turn have to be blue. And as you can see, these cards tend to have 2 different symbols here. Here you have the general, and you have the elephant, which represents control over the marketplace. And what happens is, instead of just straight up out-muscling your opponents through auctioning, what you're trying to do is you're trying to drop out of the bid at a time where you're leading in some of these areas. So if at the moment you drop out of an auction, you have the most in any of these categories, and there's 4 different court members, and there's the marketplace, right? And then there's also the mogul or the ruler, who is another person you're trying to win influence in. So technically there's 6 different symbols, 6 different places you can win. And if you have the most in any of these areas, you get to win the rights to these. And what happens is, with any of the court members or the mogul, they allow you to put these nice looking palaces in those regions, so you can have a presence in those regions. And basically the way it works is, every time you put a palace down, you score 1 point. But if you're able to connect your palaces through other regions, right? If you're able to trace a route of palaces that all connect with each other, you score an additional point for every other region in which you've connected your network to. So again, you have that route network building mechanism, which I really enjoy in games. And on top of it all, you're also gaining access to different resources by placing your palaces on certain places. And also, if you win the rights to the marketplace, you also score points for resources that are found there. And the way it works with the scoring of the resources is, every time you score a resource, not only do you score points for that resource, but you score points for all the other resources of that same type that you had scored in previous rounds. Very similar to the scoring mechanism in Castles of Burgundy with Stefan Feld, where if you collect different animals, you score points not only for those animals, but for previous animals of the same kind that you scored in previous rounds. Really, really neat mechanism, which I really, really appreciate. Plays very quick. Just a beautiful map, combining a bunch of different mechanisms that I tend to appreciate into just what feels like a gateway game, a simple enough game, and not a very time-consuming game, but a game that you feel that really immerses you and you feel enriched by the experience after you're done. And everybody that I introduced this game to, it's worked pretty well. This is Taj Mahal, my number 3 game from this time period, designed by Reiner Knizia, and this one came out in the year 2000. And now we move on to my number 2 game from this time period, and that is Carcassonne, designed by Klaus-Jürgen Wrede and published by Z-Man Games, or at least this edition was, right? So this game came out in 2000. This is one of the mega gateway hits of the decade, of the century. This game has sold millions of copies. It's been a gateway game for many, many people, and till this day has a lot of success through lots of different spin-offs or reiterations of the game. But at the end of the day, with all those reiterations, all those spin-offs, which I do enjoy a lot, this is still my personal favorite way of playing Carcassonne. Now, I do like playing with some of the expansions, Inns and Cathedrals, Traders and Builders. These are kind of like must-haves for me. But this game, I feel like with all the different meeples that you can choose from, throughout those different expansions, it adds a lot of meaty decisions to the game, at least in my opinion, that makes it feel just a little bit beyond a gateway experience. But if you want to, you just play without those expansions, introduce your non-gamer friends, your casual gamers to this game, and they'll enjoy it and they'll love it too. Tile placement, if you're in this hobby at all, you've probably heard about this. Heck, if you've even been curious about the hobby, there's a good chance that you've heard about this. Here's a little look at the back. You're placing these tiles, which basically is kind of like a puzzle. You're creating the board, you're creating the map as you go, and you're placing these little wooden pieces shaped as people, which are called meeples in the board game hobby. And depending on what type of tile you place it on, you will eventually score points accordingly. And now we will move on to my number 1 game from this time period. And it was tough. Carcassonne was really, really close. It was really tight between Carcassonne and my number 1 game. Here we go. And that is Battle Cry, designed by Richard Borg and published by Avalon Hill, I believe. I believe this is Avalon Hill. Yep, Avalon Hill through Hasbro. This is a Civil War themed game, which is the founder of what is now known as the Command and Colors system of Richard Borg's war games, right? Richard Borg has done Memoir 44, Battle Lore, Commands and Colors Ancients, Commands and Colors Napoleonics, and a whole bunch of other different reiterations of that gaming system. But this was the original game system, and while I'll admit it's not my favorite of the games per se, it might be my favorite, or at least my second to favorite, historical time period or war. I really am fascinated by Civil War history and Civil War, war story. This is something that's always interested me, something that's always fascinating. In this game, players are playing down cards, command cards, which allow them to order their troops on a certain area of the board. So you've got your battlefield that's divided into three. You've got your center of your battlefield. You've got your left and your right flanks. And each of these cards allow you access to give orders to a certain amount of troops in one or more of those different areas of the battle. And sometimes you have special cards that allow you to do something crazy and order, special types of troops in special types of way that kind of like, break or bend the rules of the actual game to some extent, right? It allows certain troops or certain units to do something that they wouldn't be allowed to do normally when you play that card. So you're moving these three different types of units. You have your infantry units, you have your cavalry units, and you have your artillery units. And you're moving these different units according to they each have their own movement rules. They have their own combat battle rules, right? They have a certain range of distance as to how far they could battle someone, a certain amount of dice that they roll according to that distance, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting is to score a hit against a unit, you need to roll the side of the die that matches that unit. And this game comes with nice pieces, nice little miniatures representing your different types of units. Here you have your cannon or artillery units, and here you have, somebody else that goes along with your cannon. He's like watching out for them, and you have your cavalry units led by these guys with the flag, and you have your footmen or your infantry units right here, and you have these different terrain tiles because each the game comes with a booklet of this is actually the 150th anniversary edition, so it's a little bit better than the original edition that came out in 2000. It comes with 30 different scenarios, which consists of 30 different historical battles, and it gives you a little bit of historical information, and it sets up the board in a specific way to kind of recreate that battle, taking into account different terrain features, taking into account who may have had the advantage, who may have had more troops, who may have initiated the battle, and so on and so forth. And you're basically getting a chance to recreate these battles, factoring in these circumstances, these historical circumstances, but trying to some extent to recreate history or to rewrite history in your own way. Really, really cool, neat game. I love this system. And again, while this is not my favorite game in the system, it was my personal introduction to the system. And till this day, I still appreciate Battle Cry. And that's it. These are my top 10 games from 1996 to 2000. What are your top 10 games from this time period? Have you played any games from this time period? It's possible you haven't, right? So if you've been introduced to the game hobby in the last couple years, you might have only played recent games, but I'm curious to see if any of these games you've either played or if any of them pique your interest. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for taking some time to watch us here at When Harry Met Board Games. I am Harry. Don't forget to hit the like button down below and subscribe to our channel. And I'll catch you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.